Whenever you see a hearse go by, you know you'll be the next to die. They wrap you up in bloody sheets and throw you down 10,000 feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks. All goes well for about a week until your coffin begins to leak.
Number 1. When I was 16 years old, babysitting was an additional source of income, and I was lucky enough to have many families in my area that needed a babysitter. A lady that I babysat for quite often asked me one day if I would mind caring for her sister's baby. She mentioned that her sister had a hard time keeping a babysitter. Well, of course I thought it was due to the child. I didn't mind at all. I quickly accepted the job, meaning more income for myself, and she was a super nice lady. However, her husband was, well, a real jerk. He didn't want to be bothered with the baby at all, and he was always in a mood. For the most part, he was away a lot. My first day, she made a point to tell me that the house was quirky, that it made a lot of strange noises and whatnot. She told me to call her if I had any problems. I thought it was strange, but dismissed it as just being because she was nervous to leave her baby with a new sitter. My first week was really uneventful. A few weird noises, but I just dismissed them. One distinctive thing that I remember about the house was that it was always dark. Even on the brightest day, it was always really dark. During the day, you still had to have the lights on, even with the curtains wide open. The baby, who was only 6 months old, had a cute rainbow nightlight. It was an older one that you manually had to use some force to click on and off. Once it lightened up some in the morning, I would go and turn off the nightlight. Well, morning came, and I turned off the nightlight. I went out to the living room to catch up on some homework, and as soon as I got settled, the baby started screaming. I rushed into his room. He was hysterical, and the nightlight was on. I know for a fact that I turned it off. It wasn't a mistake or something I thought I did. I played it in my mind over and over and over again. I know that I turned that light off. I took the baby and comforted him. I was so disoriented and scared, I didn't even try to turn it off again. I thought, if something wants it on, it can be on. I didn't tell the mother about the nightlight. Every day, she would come and ask me if everything was okay. And I knew she wasn't just talking about her son. Over the next few weeks, the experiences came more and more often. Lights turning on and off, and doors opening and closing all by themselves. All of the events finally came to a peak. I was in the kitchen mixing oatmeal for the baby, when from behind, something tugged the bottom hem of my shirt, and hard. It was so hard that my shirt tightened around my neck. I turned around, and no one was there. I screamed and ran into the living room, where the baby stared at me from his high chair like I was crazy. I didn't tell his mother about this either. I don't know why I didn't tell her. Maybe I was scared that she would think I was crazy. Or maybe I just didn't want to bother her with it. Or maybe I was just scared, since I never told anyone. Finally, she and her husband moved out of the house that fall, making their stay there only 10 months. I was the only babysitter who managed to be permanent during their time there. I never discussed the events that happened there. Later, I did some research on the area. It was incredibly rural and as out of the way as you can possibly get. It also had a rich history in Indian tribes. While looking up the house, I discovered that during its construction, evidence of a full Indian burial site had been discovered. Number 2. Strange things have been happening in Red Cody 27's house for as long as they can remember. One night, they woke to the sound of someone standing just outside their room, the floor creaking under their weight. They closed their eyes and pretended to be asleep, hoping that whoever it was would leave them alone. Whoever it was entered the room and stopped right beside their bed. They could feel the presence there. They cracked open their eyes, hoping to still appear asleep while stealing a glimpse at the presence. A white figure stood in front of them. At first, they wanted to call out to their brother, but they were too afraid to antagonize the ghost. Eventually, their eyes closed, and when they opened them again a few moments later, the figure was gone. Thinking their father's bedroom would be a safer place to sleep, they wrapped themselves in a blanket and made their way across the house. But when they entered the dining room, they felt as though several pairs of eyes were staring directly at them. They kept going until they reached the doors of the bedroom, but it was locked. Instead of going back to their room, they went into the living room and fell asleep. At around 4 in the morning, they woke again, and sitting on top of the television in the corner was the white figure. This time, it was clear that the figure was an elderly woman. She was somewhat blurry, and her eyes were darker than her pale body. She said their name and tried coaxing them outside. They screamed, and the figure vanished. They hid under the blanket until morning. When daylight had come, they told their story to their family. Their brother believed every word, saying that he had seen the exact same figure before, watching him sleep. Number 3. About 2 weeks ago, twin_fish93's little sister began hearing a voice. She said it was a deep and masculine voice that would call to her at night in her room, telling her to come outside. It came from outside, in the middle of their yard. One day, their parents went out, and the Reddit user, their 2 little sisters, and their friend stayed home alone. That night, they saw something moving in the small patch of trees in their backyard. Telling the younger girls to stay inside, they went to investigate, but found nothing. On their way back inside, something threw them over 5 feet into the air. They scrambled to their feet and ran inside, losing a shoe in the process. After cowering inside for a few minutes, they realized they needed that shoe for work the next day. So, they ventured back outdoors. This time, they came prepared, bringing their dog with them for protection, but he refused to follow them into the backyard. As quickly as they could, they grabbed their shoe and ran back inside. Finally, back indoors, they asked the elder of their sisters to look at their back because it felt like it was burning. She pulled up their shirt and screamed. There were several long scratches running down the user's back. The 4 then went out to the front porch while the youngest went back inside to retrieve something, but came back a few seconds later saying that someone was looking into their back window. The only problem was that in order for her to have seen someone in the window, that person would have had to have been over 7 feet tall. Now, all thoroughly freaked out, they decided to remain on the porch until one of their parents came home. After a few minutes passed, they all heard heavy footsteps running towards the front yard from the side of the house where the driveway extended. Gravel flew as though it was being kicked up, but nothing was there. They went back inside until their mother got home. She blessed the area where the Reddit user had been attacked and their sister's body and spirit. Whatever the thing was, it didn't appear to be able to get inside the house. The user and their sisters still believe that it's hanging around the house to this day. Number 4. 900 Pop TR loved their grandparents, but hated their house. The house had been in their family for over a century, and something had always felt off about it. The rooms would always feel cold despite the air being off, and visitors often reported feeling like they were being watched. For about a month, this user and their parents were living in the house. It was during this time that an event happened that terrified them. One night, they woke for no particular reason and went to the bathroom. Suddenly, the door shut and locked behind them. The lock on the door was broken, so it shouldn't have been able to lock at all, let alone close on its own. Then, the light in the bathroom went out. They had always been interested in ghost hunting and had a ghost hunting app on their phone. They'd used it in the past, but assumed it didn't work. The app was supposed to tell its user whatever the ghost was saying. As they opened the app, they felt something, or someone, breathing down their neck. A few seconds later, the door unlocked, and the ghost hunting app read one word: run. They ran back to hide and hid under their covers until they fell asleep. The next night, they woke again and went into the kitchen for a snack. It was there that they saw a dark figure pick something up from the pantry, turn to them, and then disappear. They tried to return to their room, but the living room door slammed shut as they walked towards it. Again, they felt someone breathing down their neck. They kept pulling at their door until it finally opened. Back in their room, hiding under the covers, they couldn't sleep because they kept hearing footsteps on the porch. The next night, they decided to try sleeping in the den. Their phone was left open to the ghost hunting app when it picked up a signal. It read, Quinton, their great-grandfather's name. That was the last activity the user experienced before they moved out. Number 5. A couple of years ago, JB Harrow was working the night shift and was on their way to work when they were stopped at a streetlight. Since there were no other cars or people around, they quickly got impatient with the waiting around. That was when they heard a knock on the passenger side window. Outside stood an older man, seemingly around 60. They rolled down the window and asked if he was okay. When he didn't answer, the writer asked again, but still got no response. Finally, he asked for a ride, saying that he only needed to go a few blocks. The writer said yes and turned up the heat after he got in, noticing that the man was shivering. After they had been driving for a while, the man said his name was Henry. The driver asked once more if he was okay. Henry seemed drunk or ill. Henry sat still, saying nothing. After about 10 minutes of driving, Henry suddenly shouted, asking the driver to stop. Eerily, they were in the middle of nowhere with fields on either side. Henry climbed from the car and started walking down the street. He then suddenly stopped in the middle of the road and stood there, unmoving. Slowly, the writer started to drive away, and looking in the rearview mirror, they saw Henry following the car. Their attention briefly shifted down because of a notification on their phone. When they looked up again, Henry was gone. They sped to work and told a co-worker about the incident as soon as possible. Apparently, Henry is a regular and does this often, freaking out newcomers to the area. Number 6. In 2013, Zombabe and her friends decided to make a Ouija board. Her best friend lived about a 45-minute drive from the closest store and the nearest town, so there wasn't much to do. They'd spend the day watching movies, but eventually got bored. So, the user, her friend, the friend's boyfriend, and his friend decided to make the board. About a week before they made the board, the two friends had been staying alone at the house when the Reddit writer woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway nearing the bedroom. She tried to wake her friend, but it was no use. She was a heavy sleeper. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The writer waited, holding her breath for the door to open. But it never did. The next few hours she spent awake, waiting for something to happen. When both girls were finally awake by 11 that morning, before either left the room, she told her friend what had happened earlier that morning. And what her friend said in response chilled her to the bone. She said that for years she'd been hearing the same footsteps, and that they had always stopped right outside her bedroom. No one else had heard the footsteps until the writer. That night, they made their Ouija board. The group were messing around with it, not getting any real responses, when they suddenly heard a loud bang in the back of the house. They decided to stop for the night. The friend left to drive the other two home, leaving the Reddit user alone at the house. Being alone after hearing the loud noise and the footsteps made her nervous, so she turned on the television for a distraction. While she waited for her friend to return, in the middle of the opening credits, the television froze and started making loud buzzing noises. She tried to turn off the TV, but the remote wouldn't work. Then she tried unplugging it, but it kept going. Thoroughly freaked out, she went outside to wait for her friend to get back. At this point, she had started shaking and crying and had texted her friend explaining what had happened. Then, the dogs started barking at the living room door, viciously growling and snarling like they saw something no human could. 30 minutes later, her friend finally arrived back home. Both girls could hear the television from the porch, but when they went inside, it had completely shut off and was still unplugged. Neither of them were sure exactly what happened, but they were certain it was some kind of malevolent spirit. Until next time.
Worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, the worms play pinochle on your snout. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose, they eat the jelly between your toes. A big green worm with rolling eyes crawls in your stomach and out your thighs. Your stomach turns a slimy green and pus pours out like whipping cream. You spread it on a slice of bread, and that's what